Yet again, the show opens with a man named David Budd on a train in London, joined by his 2 children. Minutes after the fact, he sees an unusual man disposing of his telephone in the garbage and entering the latrine. He likewise sees a female train guard who has all the earmarks of being exceptionally restless. She proceeds to check on the man in the latrine, but he doesn't answer. Seeing this, David requests that a passenger care for his children and heads to converse with the guard. He presents himself as a cop and asks what is happening. The lady explains that she's panicked because they have received information that a terrorist is on this train. She believes the man in the latrine is a threat as he has been acting dubiously. Frightened, David decides to confront the suspect and demands that the guard open the doors. He intends to push him out an entryway, assuming that he emerges with a bomb. However, minutes after the fact, the man exits with practically no device and nonchalantly returns to his seat. After a murmur of relief, David enters the latrine to check whether the man has set a device there. However, he is astonished to find a terrified lady with a bomb around her midsection. David senses that she is scared and doesn't have any desire to do this, so he talks to her. The lady reveals she is Nadia, and the dubious man from before is her significant other. Nadia attempts to explode the device, but David intervenes and calms her down. He tells her about his experience as a tactical officer in Afghanistan and how terrorism and violence go on and on. Well, he then requests that she abandon the mission and vows to shield her from her better half, anything to prevent another red wedding. Soon after, the train stops and several cops board. They are about to shoot Nadia, but David stops them and reveals that she will surrender. She eventually emerges from the latrine, after which an officer disarms the explosive and removes it from her waist. Following this, Nadia's husband is arrested, and she is taken into police custody for questioning. In the following scene, David takes his children and drops them off at his ex-Vicky's home. After putting the children to bed, the two talk for a while, and Vicky invites him to spend the night. David then attempts to kiss her, but she promptly rejects him, stating she didn't mean it that way. What way did she mean it then? This frustrates David so much that he suddenly leaves. The next morning, David is summoned by his supervisor, who commends him for what he did on the train. She also offers him the position of bodyguard to Home Secretary Julia Montague, who is running for Prime Minister. David readily accepts the job and returns home, where he does some research on Julia Montague. He finds that she is extremely supportive of military action abroad. This upsets David a bit as he's still dealing with PTSD from his time in Afghanistan. The following day, David arrives for his first day of work as Julia's bodyguard and greets her. He advises her to enter the minister's building through the underground entrance for her safety. However, Julia seems uninterested and leaves without responding. David then follows her while she works and brings her back home at the end of the day. During the drive, he suggests that the driver take a different route because the current one appears to be dangerous. His interference irritates Julia, but he states that he's trying to keep her safe. He also calls her ma'am a lot, which is amusing and distracting. When they arrive at Julia's home, he begins to inspect each room for potential security threats. This disturbs her, and she requests that he leave, but David explains that he is simply doing his job. Minutes later, Julia reads his report and realizes that he was the one who successfully prevented the train bombing incident. She begins to warm up to him and apologizes for her previous conduct. David also doesn't overemphasize it, and they shake hands. The following day, Julia is preparing for an interview when her assistant accidentally spills coffee on her. David offers his shirt without hesitation, and she is touched by the gesture. Soon after, the interview begins, and David watches Julia discussing her military plans. We see that it causes him significant stress as it brings back his memories of the war. At night, when they arrive at Julia's place, she thanks David for his shirt. She also tells him that the terrorist caught on the train will be executed. When asked about Nadia, she reveals that she has not said anything and is still terrified. After this, Julia asks about David's family, and he tells her that he is married with 2 children. He then asks if she has always wanted to be a politician. Julia answers that she was a criminal lawyer who decided to go into politics to address the flaws she found in the legal system. David disagrees with many of her ideas, so she tells him that he doesn't need to vote for her, he just needs to protect her. Afterward, David returns to his home and attempts to call Vicky again. However, she doesn't answer his calls, leaving him frustrated. The next morning, he goes to see her in hopes of reconciling, but Vicky surprises him by saying that she has already met someone else. This devastates David, and he pleads with her not to get divorced. He tells her that if something happens to him, she could receive his pension if they are still legally married. David is giving her some dark ideas. In the following scene, David meets his friend Andy, with whom he served in the military. Andy's face is severely scarred from his time in the service, and he is also suffering from trauma. When he learns that David works for the Home Secretary, he is deeply disappointed. He reproaches his friend for working for the politicians who sent them to die and caused the deaths of his comrades. David understands that Andy has a point but says nothing. The next morning, we see David dropping off his children at school. It turns out his son has developmental issues leading to constant bullying from other children. He refuses to go to school, but David encourages him to face the bullies and inform the principal if they bother him. With no other choice, the boy reluctantly enters inside. Later, Julia and David are en route to work when he gets repeated calls from his ex. At first, he disregards them, but when the calls continue to come, Julia requests that he answer it. Vicky then informs him that the special school they applied to for their son doesn't have a spot for him. She's very upset, but David assures her they'll find another special school for him. He then states he's working and hangs up. When they arrive at their destination, he apologizes to Julia for accepting personal calls, but she doesn't seem to mind. Later at the office, Julia meets with a man who tells her about a potential terrorist attack on a school, the same school David's children attend, which astonishes her. They suspect that this action is revenge for David's efforts to prevent the terrorist attack on the train. However, they decide not to inform the school, but rather to increase security to avoid causing panic among people. The following morning, children are playing at the school when terrorists show up in a white van and plan to attack. Seeing this, a teacher quickly takes the kids inside, and a police van arrives before the school to keep the terrorists out. They then engage the terrorists, causing their truck to crash. Apparently, they are dead, so an officer approaches the truck to confirm. Tragically, one of the terrorists is still alive, and he quickly detonates the bomb, causing the vehicle to explode and killing 3 officers in the process. Later, when David learns of the attack, he immediately calls Vicky and is relieved to hear that their children are safe. He is then summoned by his supervisor, who informs him that this act could be retaliation for the train incident. Thus, his wife and children have been moved to a secure shelter in case of future attacks. This pleases David, but then his supervisor shocks him by revealing that he has been relieved of his duties as Julia's bodyguard and assigned a desk job. David demands to know why he's being punished, but his supervisor answers that because the terrorists are after him, it is too dangerous for him to be with Julia. In the end, he has no choice but to comply with his superior's orders. Later, David meets up with Andy once more and gets drunk. They discuss the government's response to the terrorist attack, and Andy comments that Julia is merely exploiting the situation to gain power. He asks how she would feel if she had to go through what they did. Hearing this, David is puzzled as he realizes that his friend intends to harm her. The following morning, Vicky receives a letter informing her that a spot at the special school has suddenly opened up. She quickly informs David, and they celebrate the news. Later, he is called by his supervisor, who informs him that he has been reinstated as Julia's bodyguard. David asks how this happened, and she answers that he seems to have made some high-ranking friends. Hearing this, David quickly understands that it was Julia who brought him back and also helped with his son's school. Later, he reports for duty, and Julia says it is good to have him back. At night, she invites him to dinner, which he accepts. They begin discussing their personal lives, and Julia reveals that she was once married. David also admits that he has been separated from his wife and is only maintaining a good relationship for their children. He thanks her for her help with his son's school situation, to which Julia responds that she entered politics to help people. The next day, Julia and David are heading to a meeting with the Prime Minister, but shortly after, someone unexpectedly fires at the car, killing the driver on the spot. David realizes that they are in danger, so he quickly gets moving and advises Julia to stay low. The bullets keep coming at the car, but he assures her that they won't penetrate the armored metal. He even holds her hand to calm her down. The bullets won't penetrate today, but I will tonight, ma'am. Following this, David calls the police and waits for reinforcements to arrive. However, even after some time, no one shows up. With the sniper continuing to shoot, David takes control of the situation and starts driving. Minutes later, he slips out of the car and snaps a photo of his surroundings. He soon realizes that the sniper is on the roof of a nearby building and decides to go there. A panicked Julia begs him not to leave, but David assures her that nothing will happen and insists that she stay inside. Minutes later, he enters the building and makes his way to the rooftop. Surprisingly, he finds that the sniper is none other than his former friend, Andy. The latter declares that it is too late for him and asks David to complete the mission by killing Julia. David urges him to surrender, but Andy pulls the trigger on himself and commits suicide. After this incident, Julia is taken to a hotel for her safety. When David goes to meet her, she is still shaken and traumatized by what happened. She continues to cry, but David assures her that she is now safe. When their hands accidentally brush, Julia informs him that she isn't a queen and that he's allowed to touch her. David then gives her a hug and tries to calm her down. In the heat of the moment, they suddenly start kissing and eventually have sex. I told you, ma'am. The next day, David meets with his supervisor, who praises him for his heroic actions and informs him that he will be recommended for a commendation. She demands to know who Julia has been meeting with in the last few days and what her secret plans are. David is appalled by this and believes he cannot disclose such information. However, his supervisor reveals that Julia is a dangerous politician who should be stopped at all costs. She explains that Julia knew about the attack on the school, but didn't inform him, despite knowing that his children go there. Hearing this, David is left stunned and doesn't know what to say.